Despite 86% of Commanders fans wanting Deebo Samuel back, his contract is set to void on Thursday and could cost Adam Peters more than $12 million against the 2026 NFL salary cap.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, and I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, also writing for Commanders on SI, and of course I'm here with you 5 days a week. Coming up on this episode, cleaning out the salary cap is a necessary yearly activity for NFL general managers, and while we all love Deebo, keeping him may cause more problems for David Blough's offense than it provides answers. But first, why dead cap hurts, but bad contracts hurt more, and that could lead to Deebo Samuel leaving in free agency. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Dead cap hurts. It obviously does, right? Anytime you lose money for a player that you no longer have on your roster, that's not a fun thing to necessarily do. But the Commanders do have to do what is right for the team first, and that, of course, falls on the shoulders of general manager Adam Peters, and that means that Deebo Samuel may be walking out of the door. So this conversation is sparked by the fact that on Thursday, and typically the NFL schedule works on a 4 p.m. Eastern time deadline, so if that is the case in these matters, which I can't confirm to you that it is, but I do believe that's what it is, then Deebo Samuel's contract will void, and all the void money on his remaining contract that was reworked by the Washington Commanders when he arrived in the trade last offseason from San Francisco 49ers will basically come due, and it would result in a 12.344.420 dead cap figure against the Washington Commanders 2026 NFL salary cap. That, according to Spot Track itself, the website posted that up on X on Thursday morning. And yeah, $18.25 million earned by Deebo Samuel in 2025 carries a $16 million valuation into free agency in 2026. Again, all that shared by Spot Track on Thursday morning. And that kind of has led to this conversation that we're going to have here on not just this episode, but the next episode. So this conversation has so many layers to it. The Deebo ramifications, the offense ramifications, but also the cap ramifications and everything else. And we're actually going to do 2 episodes on this. So just let you know right up front, this episode, the very next episode, will both cover everything we can talk about this topic. So that will be, there will be another episode shortly after this one, kind of following up everything. But here on this one, we're going to start off by talking about some of the money, right? So again, he's 30 years old, earned $18.25 million in cash. That's actual cash payments in 2025 after the reworked deal. The deal was reworked to save Adam Peters and the Washington Commanders front office room on the salary cap, not necessarily out of Josh Harris's checkbook. Those things are 2 very different things that we can't even begin to discuss in an episode like this one, even to my limited knowledge of what that is, which is limited in a sense as a media member. So in free agency, he's estimated to earn anything from $13.3 million to $16 million, like the Spot Track tweet said. Their valuation of him is about $16 million. The Commanders, if you bring him back on a $16 million per year extension, then you're kind of looking at committing over $35 million in cap space. Now, that's a rough math estimate because in the reality of things, Adam Peters, say it's a 2-year extension, you're going to eat up that void money in that new contract, and you're going to establish new guarantees, new signing bonuses, all that stuff. And most likely what would end up happening is more void years onto the contract to spread out the number. So I'm not saying that re-signing Deebo would count for $35 million in cap space against the books, but in some way, shape, or form of accounting, the 2025 year would cost the Washington Commanders roughly about $35 million in cap space that they have to account for over the lifetime of the contract. Hopefully that all makes sense. And you add that to Terry McLaurin's contract, $18.35 million cap hit projected, which could be, you could always rework a deal and thin that out as well. But obviously Terry's not going anywhere, so that money is going to be on the books. So when you have a projected, $89.8 million in salary cap space, you don't want to spend roughly $34 million of it. And again, you can spread that out, sure, but when you talk about just raw accounting, that's a lot of money to dedicate to just 2 players at the wide receiver position when you need help on the edge, when you need a new starting left guard, right? Even if it's Chris Paul, it's going to be a new contract. So that's a new piece of accounting that you've got to account for. If you're Adam Peters, what happens at the linebacker position? Do you need more corners? And obviously you have a draft class that you have to account for, which roughly I think most front offices kind of account for about $10 million in the new draft class. So that money management factor absolutely playing a part in this. You add to it, and it's not really fair, but like this is kind of how the conversation is going to be narrated across the league. Deebo Samuel coming out of 2025 where he had a career low 10.1 yards per catch. And if you're an everydayer and you've heard a lot of my commentary on the offense last year, you already know that I don't blame Deebo for that as much as I blame the scheme that he was playing in that kind of bottled him up. But like I said, when we talk about the overarching conversation, this is what's going to happen. It's kind of like the conversation with Terry McLaurin last offseason. I was actually having a conversation about this very thing this morning with one of our all access subscribers that, as much as like Terry wants credit for how good he did with subpar quarterbacks, subpar offensive schemes and things like that, what Adam Peters is going to do is take the production arc as it is and negotiate based off of that. So Deebo Samuel, like he's going to enter that same type of situation. He's got to go out there and his agent have convinced these teams that are potentially going to look to sign him in the offseason or re-sign with the Washington Commanders. And he's got to fight that 10.1 yards per catch career low as a 30-year-old receiver stigma, because that just kind of is what the facts say it is. And he knows, and I know, and and truthfully, these GMs know that the scheme and the limitations of the offense obviously played a part in that, but how much wiggle room they're going to be willing to give him because of that that's the art of the negotiation. Right there. So, of course, you look at his 2021 peak, and that's something that we all talked about even when he was traded here from San Francisco. Hasn't been the same guy since 2021. 18.2 yards per catch in 2021, all the way down to 10.1 yards per catch in 2025. Again, I don't blame that on Deebo alone, but those are the numbers that it is. And then, of course, you also have the fact that he was, brought in to be this kind of Swiss Army knife, offensive weapons, wasn't really used as a ball carrier all that much, had 75 yards and a touchdown as a ball carrier. So, if he's also not presenting this dynamic Swiss Army knife ability, then that kind of limits his market value as well to the Washington Commanders, but also to the rest of the world. And if David Blough is not going to use a player in that aspect prominently enough to warrant that expense, right? Because you're talking, that expense, you're talking like number 2 weapon type money. If you're not going to use him as a number 2 weapon in that way to justify that expense, then it makes all the sense in the world why the Washington Commanders would let that void year contract expire and just kind of see what happens from there. So, of course, there's obviously the conflict, right? 83%, I think it said 86% in the beginning of the episode, my bad. 83% of Commanders fans want him back, think that he has value. I love Deebo. I remember, talking to him at the NFL Scouting Combine when he came into the NFL, really liked his personality, really liked talking to him then. Was very excited to get to know him a little bit more this year, and it's been a blast. I think he's better than what he was able to show on the field in the system last year. But again, it's the vision for the future, and it's the balancing of the books that Adam Peters has to do. So if you're in the minority there and you're at 17% that wanted him gone, you're probably actually pretty happy about this news. But there is more to talk about, again, like I said. So what explains the what? That's the what is happening with Deebo Samuel. Void year contract about to expire, dead cap on Adam Peters' books, how it impacts these other roster decisions or roster contracts with Terry McLaurin's contract, all that stuff. But let's talk about the why. Let's talk about more about that David Blough offense and why it might be making sense to let Deebo Samuel walk away in free agency this offseason. That and more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move about your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out your forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person, or you can connect online, whatever suits your schedule best. And then from there, they handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms, and they work to get you every single legal deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and then you get updates right in the TurboTax app, so you don't have to worry about waiting on a call or anything like that. It's a huge time saver, gives you real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it for a limited time. You can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, you just need to file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate, get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day today and every day to the Everydayers. Those of you who come through for every single episode, I greatly appreciate you coming through for yet another one today. And thank you to everybody for helping make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If any of you have not already checked out the Everydayer Club, I highly recommend you at least go browse through it a little bit. You got two membership tiers to the Everydayer Club. One is simply called Member Tier. You get ad-free episodes of Locked On Commanders and more. And then you have the All Access tier where you get everything in the membership tier, but you also get one-on-one text access with me. You get discounts on the merch store. You get a daily newsletter. You get so much more in that All Access Club, including bonus All Access content that will go out to just the All Access population from time to time instead of everybody. Of course, everybody still gets this daily content free and available anywhere you listen or watch your podcast. So thank you to everybody who's already signed up for the Everydayer Club and to those of you who will at least consider it in the near future. Continuing our conversation today about Deebo Samuel and, of course, Spot Track sharing with us on Thursday morning that Deebo Samuel's contract is expected to void on Thursday. It would cost the Washington Commanders about $12.4 million in dead cap space against the 2026 salary cap. We just talked about the function of it, what it means to the salary cap, kind of how it stacks up against the other contracts on the roster. Now let's talk about the why. Why would the Washington Commanders allow Deebo Samuel's contract to void, take on the $12+ million dead cap hit in 2026, and move forward with a brand new offensive coordinator? Deebo obviously was the most available weapon on the offense last year. Noah Brown was injured pretty much the entire year. Terry McLaurin injured for most of the year. Deebo Samuel actually had to miss some time with injury himself, but of the trio was available more than anybody outside of Jalen Lane, who's a rookie that was expected to be a special teams contributor, ended up having to take on a much bigger role in the offense than the plan was when they brought him in from Va Tech in the NFL draft, 2025 NFL draft. So now we look at the future. What is David Blough's offense going to look like? And of course, we have some ideas, right? The ideas that I gave you, I think it's going to be a blend. Obviously, I think there's going to be just a little bit of everything. They're going to see a Cliff inspiration in there every once in a while, but I also think you're going to see a lot of Ben Johnson. I think you're going to see some Kevin O'Connell. You're going to see some Jeff Brom, things like that. And you're going to see some of his own stuff, some things that he kind of just pulls from different pots and says, let me mix my own potion here. But the biggest thing that we kind of look at, or the biggest thing I kind of anticipate myself, right? And you hear Jaden Daniels, Super Bowl Radio Row in San Francisco, California, talking about David Blough, and he says very specifically, like, I think there's going to be a little bit of elements of everything. He says this two specific names. Obviously, there's going to be some Cliff in there, but I think there's also going to be a lot of Ben Johnson. And for me, like, for you and me to say, well, there's going to be some Ben Johnson in there. That's one thing. We're, fans of the game, media of the game. It's our job to kind of look at the total landscape, things like that. Jaden Daniels lives this life, right? He's not on his phone wondering what everybody else is saying about David Blough. He's not on his phone searching, which coaches did David Blough work with in the past? Like, he knows David Blough. He's not doing that type of homework. So for him to say Ben Johnson's name kind of tells me that Ben Johnson's name, or at least some things that, like, hey, with the Lions, or hey, look at the Bears, that's come up in conversations. And again, I could be reading too much in between the lines, but we do have to read between the lines sometimes. So I expect to see a good amount of like Ben Johnson-esque type of stuff. And I think that when you look at the Ben Johnson offense, you see obviously the dual back type of system, right? You want one guy who's kind of a hammer, one guy who kind of can gash the team or gash the defense with one cut with speed and things like that. Chris Rodriguez Jr., being a restricted free agent, certainly can fill that hammer role. Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, Bill, certainly fills that kind of one cut role. The thing you don't have is a proven pass protector, though I do think that Chris Rodriguez Jr. is a better pass protector than he gets credit for, and a proven pass catcher out of the backfield from the running back position. And I think that goes for both Chris and Bill. Neither of them has necessarily been able to establish that they can be consistently reliable receivers out of the backfield. It's not just simply catching the ball. It's also how you release out of the backfield, the timing of it, the decision-making, the route running, all those types of things, right? So I think that this offseason, whether it be through the draft, whether it be through free agency, the Washington Commanders do end up having to go out there and target a quote-unquote third down back who could be your primary back, but also play on third downs, could be part of a three-headed rotation. We'll see how that goes. But I think that's an important part of the offense that we expect from David Blough. Other things that we need. You need an X receiver. They have that in Terry McLaurin. And just because we call him the X receiver, I want to make it clear here. I do expect David Blough. And if you missed our conversation about his comments to John Duran WSA 9 on Wednesday, talking about the 10 targets, per game to Terry McLaurin, I highly recommend you go back and check out that conversation because that was a pretty spicy quote from David Blough straight from the horse's mouth. So X receiver, but that doesn't mean that Terry's just going to be left side wide, all the time like he was in previous iterations of this offense. I do expect him in the slot. I do expect him on the right side, motion here and there, do all these kinds of things, right? But they also lean on Ben Johnson's offense, a power slot receiver. That's Luke McCaffrey in the current iteration. Now, you could always go get a replacement in a different power slot type of guy, but right now, that looks like Luke McCaffrey. Think Amon-Ra St. Brown. And again, I'm not saying Luke is going to be the next Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm just saying that's the role that I see Luke McCaffrey fitting in this new offense, which you don't have right now on the current offense, and what Deebo Samuel couldn't provide you, which I think is another big reason why, if they do walk away from him, which is still an if, not a for sure, by the way, which again, as we get through these 2 episodes, we'll get into all these layers of the conversation. So I just want to make that clear here, though. It is not a for sure that Deebo is leaving. It is a if, and it's more likely than it was before if they let this dead cap number hit, but it still is not a guarantee. Okay, so we'll get into that later on in these conversations. What you're missing is that opposite side receiver, right? Call him the Z, call him whatever you want. But basically what it is in Detroit, what it is in Chicago, or what's intended to be, is a speed receiver that can just take the top off the offense or the defense. I'm not talking about a guy like Terry McLaurin who can get downfield. Obviously, he can make plays deep. I'm talking about a true speed demon, a true deep ball receiver in the rawest form. I think Terry's going to do more slants, more digs, more hitches, things like that. And not that we haven't seen him do a lot of hitches in the past anyway, but you look at the open market and a guy like Rashid Shaheed really stands out as being able to fill that role. Now, Rashid Shaheed is a $14.1 million annual per year spot track valuation, but he would be that vertical threat that the Washington Commanders don't currently have. So instead of spending, 12 to 16, whatever million, or 16 to 20, I'm sorry, on Deebo Samuel, you spend around $14 million on Rashid Shaheed. And yes, that $12 million dead cap hit is all right now. If Rashid Shaheed's deal is 1 or 2 years, you can do some void years, things like that to limit that cap hit in 2026. And instead of bringing Deebo back, who would actually help clog the middle, so when you have that lack of stretch the field ability that a guy like Rashid Shaheed can bring you, then it clogs the middle, and that power slot now no longer gets to be as effective because there's too much traffic in the middle of the field. We saw that a lot last year when Terry McLaurin went out. So not only do you need Terry back, you need Terry healthy, doing other things than just running up and down the field from the left side, but you also need a guy like a Rashid Shaheed, if you can get him, to stretch the field that way as well. And that really opens things up underneath and in the middle for that power slot, and potentially a wide tight end, a tight end that can play split, but also can play in line, attach to the line of scrimmage, hand in the dirt, block if need be, but also stretch the field vertically down the middle of the field, up the seams, things like that. And you have some ideas out there like Isaiah Likely, like David Njoku. But anyway, that really is kind of a nutshell of why it would make sense. And I want to make sure we keep this conversation framed in the possibilities, because nothing right now is for sure. But that's why it would make sense for the 49ers, for the Commanders, to allow Deebo Samuel to not only have the void year contract expire, eat the $12.4 million in dead cap, but then eventually let him just completely walk away in free agency, bring in a guy who's maybe a little bit cheaper, but also a little bit more capable of stretching the field like Rashid Shaheed. And it also brings up the idea of Brandon Aiyuk. And Brandon Aiyuk is something that we talked about already here this week. Very mixed reactions to people. Some people want Brandon Aiyuk. Some people don't want Brandon Aiyuk. Some people have caveats. Well, if it's mostly incentives based and it's all prove it and all that stuff. And I get all the levels of the conversation. Absolutely. But you look at Brandon Aiyuk and the $12.3 million he's expected to bring in. That is a wide receiver 3 type of contract for wide receiver 1 if he returns to form like he was before he got injured, wide receiver 1 ability. But even if he returns to half of that in the early part of the season, wide receiver 2 ability at wide receiver 3 money. And he is a guy who can also stretch the field. I wouldn't necessarily call him a burner. I don't think he's like Rashid Shaheed track speed type of guy, but especially coming off that injury. But I think that he has the ability to stretch the field on the opposite side of the field from Terry. It makes defenses play honest on both sides. You stack them on the same side, run some crossers, run some drags, things like that. And it opens up the room in the middle of the field, like I said, for that power slot, Luke McCaffrey, or for that wide tight end, or for both. And also makes the defenses play with a little bit lighter boxes so that those running backs, Chris Rodriguez Jr., Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt, and whoever they bring in on top of that, have some room to operate. Those are things that Deebo Samuel just can't provide. I think Deebo can do more deep work than we saw him do in 2025, but he cannot be relied on to be a consistent deep threat against the defense. And you've already got a power slot like Luke McCaffrey on the roster. You don't need another guy like Deebo, especially if you're not going to use him as a Swiss Army knife running back / receiver. And I don't think David Blough's offense is going to do that. And that bleeds into the next step of this whole thing, where GMs have to clear salary cap every single year. Adam Peters is no different, and that also has a part to play in what's happening with Deebo Samuel's void year contract set to expire on Thursday. We'll talk about that coming up next on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by FanDuel. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like me, you're locking in on events that you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years, and that's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense, man. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Again, I've been learning all week long that there are many more fans of curling out there than I thought. I thought I was alone in some respects, so I'm happy to see that I'm not alone in those respects. Speed skating has been something, even as a kid, I remember watching speed skating, thinking how cool it was. I would, a little bit of embarrassing peek behind the curtain, but I'd go outside on my rollerblades and pretend I was a speed skater at times. Hockey games are always fun for me, so Olympic hockey is obviously just a little bit different. And even those niche events become must-watch events when you're fully locked into the competition. So FanDuel is going to keep the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Wrapping up this first part of this Deebo Samuel void year contract conversation. Again, this is a 2-part conversation. One episode now. We'll drop another episode later, wrapping up this whole thing because there are multiple layers to this. And Deebo, really, if the Washington Commanders allow this contract, which is expected that they're going to allow this contract to void on Thursday, then what they'll have to do is, again, they'll have to account for $12.4 million roughly in dead cap on the 2026 salary cap. Now, the good news there for those of you who have been tracking the offseason, those of you come up with your own ideas for offseason moves, things like that, the salary cap space and things like top 6 in the NFL, the Washington Commanders are projected to have in 2026 already accounts for Deebo Samuel's $12.4 million. So this isn't like you're taking that top 6, salary cap number for 2026, and now you're taking $12 million off it. That number was already off of that projection already. So that's the good news there is if you've been doing this and you've been using Spot Track and Over the Cap to kind of track cap space and how much money the Commanders have to spend and all that kind of stuff, or allocate, I should say, because what they spend versus what they allocate against the cap, totally different things. You've already been working with this number involved, so it's almost going to feel like really nothing happens. But you also have other veteran decisions, right? Austin Eckler and what he's going to ask for as a free agent if he decides to come back just as a vested veteran. Zach Ertz, Von Miller, Bobby Wagner, when you talk about not getting younger, obviously it helps and it matters. Like if you want to play faster, you want to play more athletic. Those two things are kind of synonymous with just getting younger, but it's also the money, right? These rookie contracts are just less than veteran contracts, or you can get a lesser proven younger guy, maybe even a 28-year-old linebacker who's got experience but doesn't have the stature of a Bobby Wagner, things like that. You're going to get him for younger, and it's all part of the salary cap health that GMs like Adam Peters have to go through. Call it clear the decks, call it whatever you want to, but you're looking for high volume, low money as much as you can possibly can, and you need a high volume edge rusher, right? Like as of right now, you look at this team's edge population, and it's Dorrance Armstrong Jr. coming off of a season-ending injury, and it's Javonte Jean-Baptiste coming off of a season-ending injury. That's not a good place to have your edge group, right? You need some edge help. So if you're going to want to spend money there, you need to then take off the opportunity to spend money elsewhere. That takes guys like Austin Eckler, Zach Ertz, potentially Von Miller. And I'm not telling you none of these guys are coming back. I'm just telling you that as you spend money elsewhere, it's not unlike your household budget. If you go spend a whole bunch of money on steaks, well, maybe you can't spend the money on, I don't know, the Frosted Flakes. I'm a Frosted Flakes fan, so I just bring that up, right? You have to make those sacrifices elsewhere. So yes, while Deebo and the $12 million cap hit, dead cap hit sucks, $12 million is maybe about 60% of what you're going to pay Deebo to stay. And then again, you got to work the cap gymnastics to make that cap hit not all come to fruition in year one. You've also already signed Tress Way to a 1-year extension. That's not going to cost you much in the grand scheme of things, but you do have that money already spent out there. So again, it just makes a lot of sense for the Washington Commanders to allow this deal to happen and to allow the Deebo Samuel contract void years to expire on Thursday. Again, first reported by Spot Track Thursday morning. But there's also the ripple effects here, because doing this is kind of like paying with a credit card, right? You pay with a credit card, you had to push some of that expense down the road. Eventually that bill comes due. So while Adam Peters has to pay this bill in 2026, and it's a $12.4 million bill, there's also a points program, and those points could help Adam Peters turn this $12 million tab into another benefit down the road. That's going to be on the next episode of Locked On Commanders, because that is all the time we have for this episode. So again, part one of our 2-part conversation about the Deebo Samuel void year contract coming to a close on Thursday, potentially barring any new news that we will react to if it comes out. So make sure you are subscribed, following along Locked On Commanders, so you get that next episode as well. Peek behind the curtain on audio. These episodes are going to drop almost back to back. There might be like a 30-minute gap between the two or something like that, but relatively back to back on audio platforms. They're going to drop pretty much immediately because there's no hindrance to doing so. On YouTube, however, YouTube algorithms punish you if you punish two videos too close together. So we do have to spread them out on YouTube. So if you want to hear all these conversations, both these episodes, these conversations back to back, head over to your favorite audio platform, and you can do that. If you have the time and patience to wait, then the second episode will drop later on in the day. In the meantime, you can follow me on X at DHarrison82, on Instagram at DHarrison_82. And if you never missed an episode, make sure you check out the Everydayer Club, lockedoncommanders.supercast.com, to get information on that. And for your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast twice per day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon. Locked On NFL dropping on YouTube or wherever you listen to today's episode. To the Everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every day. And I thank you for coming through yet again today. And to everybody out there, thanks again for coming through. And until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We will talk again real soon, right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.